Sophie already had the dinghy halfway down the beach. "Bring the oars!" she yelled to Hannah. "Can I row?" Hannah yelled back. "I'll row out to the boat. When we get on board, you can start it." "Phew! This dinghy stinks. Have you kids left bait in it?" "Sky caught a spotty and it went under the seat. He couldn't get it out." "He can try a bit of bent wire." Sophie steadied the dinghy when Hannah got in. "Do you know how to stop a fish from smelling?" "Yeah," said Hannah. "You cut off its nose." "Sophie, you told us that joke years ago." Sophie laughed and, settling herself in the bow, picked up the oars. A rush of herring sprayed away from the boat and plopped some distance away, making circles on the dark green water. The oars creaked and splashed, and in all that calm their wake spread out behind them as a straight path edged with bubbles. When they neared the mooring, Hannah reached out to grab the ladder of the mussel boat, and a moment later they were both on board and the dinghy tied up to the mooring buoy. Hannah knew how to start the diesel engine. Joe had shown her many times. But Sophie still hovered anxiously as Hannah reversed the boat away from the moored dinghy and then put it in forward gear. Too short to see over the wheel, Hannah had to stand on an old nail box which Joe had put in the boat for her. When they got to the mussel farm, Sophie took over and coasted alongside the first row of mussel buoys which bobbed in the water like a row of black plastic drums. "Beads for a giant's necklace," Sky used to call them. Hannah watched as her mother lowered the grappling iron. Then she blocked her ears to the screeching of the winch as the rope, with its clinging load of green and black shellfish, came out of the water and over the side of the boat. The mussels were a good size for eating, as long as the palm of Hannah's hand. They were stuck together, bound by the fibres of their beards, and had to be separated before being put into a sack. Hannah held one close to her face, secretly admiring the magic which was always revealed when you really looked at something. Hannah couldn't understand anyone who didn't believe in magic. Everything was magic. Every single thing. It was just a matter of looking. The more a thing was looked at, the more it would go beyond itself into that mysterious world which moved at the corner of your eye. Like mussels. Mussels were the voices of the sea. The shells opened like mouths, taking in and giving out all the secrets of the tides. When you ate mussels, you filled yourself with the sea's secrets, whether you were aware of it or not. "You don't have to separate each one," said Sophie. She had dropped the mussel rope over the side and was now pushing Hannah's box away so that she could move the boat. "Neil can do that. Just break them up into clumps small enough to get into the sacks." But Hannah took her time over the mussels. She felt that if she cleaned and separated them for Neil's stack, he would take extra good care of Shadrach, although another part of her thinking told her that life didn't work that way. Hannah sighed. For all her love of ritual and magic, there was a voice in her which sounded very like the voice of Eliana Grouse, a voice which killed magic and then accused her of superstition. Back at the mooring, Sophie and Hannah lowered the sacks of mussels into the dinghy and got in themselves. "That stinking fish again!" cried Sophie. "I hope it doesn't taint Neil's mussels. I've told Marky and Sky to leave the dinghy clean when they go fishing." "I like fishing too," said Hannah. "Why can't I have a new rod and reel like Mikey's?" "No reason," said Sophie. "Only you chose to spend your money on some new shoes." "I've got enough now for a rod." "Fine. You know what to do. Put it on the list and we'll get it for you next time we're in town." Hannah said, as though she had only just thought of it, "Hey, we could have a day off school next week and go to Nelson. There's a good fishing shop there." Sophie shook her head. "We've already talked about that." "But Sophie, he'll be homesick. I just want to make sure they're looking after him." "Stop worrying about Shadrach. He'll be very well looked after, I promise you. Do you want some good news?" "How good?" "On a scale of 1 to 10, I'd say 10.5. "What?" "When the lambs are sold, we're going to buy a pony. You can choose it." Hannah was silent. "I thought you'd be over the moon," said Sophie. Hannah struggled with tears and overcame them by anger. "Shadrach hasn't even gone yet, and you're trying to replace him." Sophie looked at her for a moment, then said, We'll talk about it later. They put the sacks of mussels on the tractor and took them up to the house. Joe was in the garage getting the rope and canvas sling he'd made for Shadrach's journey to Nelson. Sky and Mikey were with him, hammering something from an old wooden box. "Neil phoned," Joe called to Sophie. "He should be here any moment." "So soon?" Hannah turned and ran through the gate at the back of the house, up and over the fold of the hill to the gully where Shadrach was grazing, head down amongst the buttercups. She stopped and put 2 fingers in her mouth. He answered her whistle immediately. "Darling Shadrach," she called. He'd been slow enough before his fall, but now he moved like a big tortoise, feeling each leg before he put weight on it. Even when his 4 feet were firm on the ground, his legs would quiver, the movement going all the way up to the bones hunched under the skin on his back. Still, his welcome was as strong as ever as he snickered and dribbled saliva over Hannah's hair. "You'll feel better there," Hannah told him. "You'll be warm and there'll be other horses for company. Masses of red clover too. Sophie said all the people that work there are kind and you'll get lots of love." She stopped at that, hating the thought of someone else loving Shadrach as much as she did. She put her arms around his neck. "I promise you, Shadrach, I'll never get a pony. Not as long as I live." In the distance she heard a crunch of gravel as a car came round the point into the bay. Each time she'd heard that sound, she'd waited for the vehicle to pass in a cloud of dust and disappear round the headland. This car didn't keep going. The dust cloud stopped at their gateway and there was a sound of changing gears. Hannah pushed her face into Shadrach's mane, remembering all the times she'd ridden him with her head against his neck. "I'll come and see you often. I'll bring you some apples when they get ripe." "Hannah! Hannah! The float is here!" She saw Mikey running over the ridge, his eyes screwed up against the sun. "Hannah! Joe said you've got to bring Shadrach down to the house." Neil Stack had once been a jockey and he still walked like one, shoulders forward, wide, springy steps. Hannah didn't know his age, for although he was bald and his face very wrinkled, he talked and acted in a young manner. He had a rusted cream station wagon that was caked with dust and a big double horse float. "You didn't tell me it was a dirt road," he said to Joe. "Man, I've been eating so much dust that my guts would grow a tree." Joe laughed. "Stay and have some lunch." "Thanks, but no thanks. Cup of tea and I'll be away. It's been a slow trip and I've got to get back to Nelson this afternoon." He unbolted the doors at the back of the float. "We'll get Lacemaker out and give her some water." "You've got a horse in there already," said Hannah. Sure. Why'd you think I was on the road? Giving the float some exercise." "Whoa, girl. Easy. He had opened the door on a beautiful thoroughbred who was twitching nervously and shifting her feet in a rapid tap dance. "You're all right, girl. Say, anyone got a bucket of fresh water?" Joe went to get the water. Mikey, Hannah and Sky stood at the door of the float trying to see the horse. "Out of the way," said Neil. As he backed Lacemaker down the ramp, Hannah reached out and tried to touch her. She shied away, almost missing her footing on the boards. "Don't do that!" Neil yelled at Hannah. "Anything happens to this champion, I lose my job and my head. Hey, girl, steady on, pretty one." Neil then tried to soothe the horse and Hannah at the same time. "Oh, it's not your fault, Hannah, lass. She's in a flighty mood. She's going to Nelson to get in foal. Where's your pony?" "By the house," said Hannah. "He's not a pony. He's a Clydesdale." "Clydesdale?" "Yes." "A bloomin' big draft horse." "That's right." Neil swore and wiped his hand over his bald head. "That's all I need. I can't take a draft horse on that road. Not with her. I'll bloody break an axle." Hannah almost smiled. "He is terribly heavy." Joe was coming back with the water, Sophie beside him. Neil called to him. "Hey, you didn't tell me I was taking a bloody great big plough horse. No way, Joe. I can't do it." Joe said, "Hannah, bring Shadrach." Hannah went round the house to where Shadrach was standing patiently, the end of his rope halter trailing on the ground. She picked it up so that he wouldn't trip over it, but didn't need to lead him. He followed her unbidden, pleased to see her again. When Neil looked at Shadrach, his face opened with surprise. "That's not a horse," he said. "That's a famine-struck camel." "We told you he was old," Sophie said. "You said old, but he's prehistoric. He's not going to last the trip." "You'd be surprised at how strong he is," said Joe. "I've made a sling for him. And don't worry about the float. As you can see, he doesn't weigh all that much." "What if his heart gives out?" Neil said. "His heart's okay," Joe assured him. "Honestly, he's much better than he looks." "What a load," Neil said. "Lace maker and pacemaker." They put Shadrach in the float first and Joe rigged up the sling. The old horse accepted it without any kind of protest, as though this happened to him every day. When Joe had finished, Neil brought Lacemaker back to the ramp. The beautiful racehorse with her sleek coat and bobtail sniffed at Shadrach and went up the ramp with a quick whinny of welcome. In the float she put her head across and huffed in his ear. Hannah was pleased. Neil's comments had made her angry and left her without confidence in the man's reputation for being good with horses. But at least Lacemaker had recognised Shadrach for the fine horse he was, and was making every effort to be friendly. She'd be a good travelling companion for him. The sacks of mussels, still dripping, were put on a plastic sheet in the boot of Neil's car. Then they all went into the house where Mikey had set out a plate of his special shortbread for morning tea. Neil, who had known Joe for years, talked about old times and the friends they both knew. Joe made interested noises, but in fact the whole family was under the weight of a silence, and whatever the topic of conversation, thoughts kept drifting back to Shadrach waiting in the horse float. Hannah saw her father's eyes looking into space beyond Neil's head, and she observed Sophie breaking a piece of shortbread into crumbs without purpose. Even Sky was quiet, and usually Sky only stopped talking when he was sick or asleep. Hannah looked at Joe. "When are we going to Nelson to see Shadrach?" "What?" said Neil Stack. He looked quickly at Joe and then said, "Oh, yeah, sure." "We'll talk about that later," Joe said to Hannah. Then to Neil he said, "Want more tea?" "No, thanks." Neil stood up. "I've got to move. If my boss ever finds out I've come all this way to pick up an old horse, I'll be taking a long walk down a short jetty. Thanks for the mussels, mate. They'll go down a treat." Hannah had decided she wouldn't watch the horse float leave, but when the time came, she was there with the rest of the family. Mikey stood beside her. "We're making a sled for the hill. When it's finished, you can have a ride." Hannah sniffed and nodded. She was glad that Neil Stack was driving slowly over the bumps in the drive, and that Shadrach was with Lacemaker. But what would it be like at the other end? Were the horses just as friendly at the rest home for aged equestrian friends? And were the stables really as warm and luxurious as Sophie thought? How could Sophie be so sure? Hannah stopped waving. In a bold movement and without any kind of protection, she folded her arms and thought the words, "Oh, Hannibal Megasaurus, mighty spirit of the animals of this bay, I command you to go with Shadrach and protect him from all troubles." Joe put his arm around Hannah's shoulders. "Did Sophie tell you we're going to get a pony?" "I don't want a pony! Never!" "Never is a long time," said Joe. "You need a pony. This isn't the best place in the world for a bicycle." The car and float were out of sight, but a column of dust rose from the road and flowed towards them, thick as smoke. "We might leave it for a few months," said Joe. Shaking her head, Hannah pulled away. Then she went to the gully to cry.